As stated in one of our previous videos, persuading people is one of the most difficult things you'll need to try to do. However, the methodologies that you can use to actually wind up persuading somebody, how you go about doing it, is really not that complicated, in that we pretty much know the basic ways that we persuade people. And what those three main methods are is the subject of this video. So when we talk about persuading people through the three classic ways, we're talking about the use of ethos, pathos, and logos, all right? Now, what these are, well, let's talk about them for a bit. You see, when you are persuading people, you can use lots of different ways, but they're going to basically fall into four basic things. Now, how you go about doing these things can be, a number of different ways. But first and foremost, you want to build your credibility with your audience. Okay, you need to explain to them why they should listen to you, why you are credible, why you are trustworthy on the topic you're speaking about. You also want to be sure you use good evidence. You don't just want to stand up and just give your opinion. You need good evidence, and that evidence needs to be paired with good reasoning, solid reasoning that doesn't have issues with it. And then lastly, you want to appeal to a people's emotions. And these are the four basic things you use, and they're grouped into three broad categories. And these come from our old friend Aristotle. So let's look at these. So the first thing Aristotle talks about is ethos. Now, ethos is simply Aristotle's name for credibility. If you hear somebody say they have good ethos, they mean you have credibility. And what credibility is, it's the perception of your competence and character from the audience. And you want to have good ethos. You don't want people to think you're just, a lying zombie. You want them to think you have competence and character. Even if they disagree with you, you want them to think well of you. And when we talk about ethos, we need to understand that credibility is not stagnant. And this is a good thing. If credibility was stagnant, never could change, that would be very bad for the vast majority of us. But there's three basic types of credibility. The first one is called initial credibility. Now, what initial credibility is this is the level of credibility you have basically before you ever say a word. It's primarily based on name recognition, people knowing who you are or knowing your expertise before you talk. And there's a few things you can do to enhance this. For example, if you've ever gone to a conference or so forth, they may have a speaker, and in the bulletin or whatever for the conference, they may have a little bio of that person. Another thing that can be done to enhance initial credibility is there's a special type of speech and special occasion speaking called a speech of introduction. And that's when you give a speech introducing another speaker. And the whole point of that speech is to boost that person's initial credibility. But for the vast majority of us, myself included, on a scale of like 1 to 10, our initial credibility is going to be low. It's going to be like 1, 2, or 3. And that's fine. None of us are CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. We're not some internationally renowned expert in something. We're not elected to some major office. So that's totally understandable. So what we need to focus on, and we want to enhance our initial as best as we can, but what you really want to focus on is your derived credibility. This is the level of credibility you gain or maybe lose over the course of your speech. And this is based on how well it's organized, how good your evidence and reasoning is. Can the audience follow along? Do you sound confident? All these things go into derive. So obviously, if we start low, we want it to tick up as we go along. And then that leads us into terminal credibility. And this is the level of credibility that you have when you are done speaking. When you've said thank you and sat down, your perception of credibility in the audience, that is your terminal level of credibility. So again, having low initials, fine. What we want to focus on is making sure we do those things to make our credibility go up through our derived credibility and end with high terminal. Well, what can we do to enhance our credibility? Well, a couple things. First, explain our competence. If we are competent in a subject, tell the audience that. All right. Remember, if there's not somebody introducing you and there's not some bio written up about you ahead of time, the audience probably is not going to know anything about you. Maybe a few people who are your friends might, but that's it. So you need to tell them what makes you competent to talk on that subject, whether it's doing some research and citing some sources up front to let people know that, or telling them some personal history that's relevant, something to explain your competence. You also want to try to establish some common ground with the audience. Okay, even if you disagree, all right, try to find some basic principle or value. It's be like, you're for A, I'm for B. We obviously disagree, but can we agree? Both of us are trying to do what we think is best for the people in our district. Yes, okay. So establish some type of common ground, even if they disagree with you, because that can help show that the gap between you is not as big as some people may think. And you also want to speak expressively and with conviction. And I cannot hammer on this enough. You may have heard me say this in one of our previous videos. The name of the class is public speaking, not public reading. You have to speak expressively with conviction, your passion, your enthusiasm for what you're discussing, why you think it's important. That needs to come out in how you deliver the content of your speech. Because if you just kind of go in there and go, yeah, this is a big problem and we ought to do something about it, and it's going to kill everybody unless we do something about it, and I think it's a thing we ought to take. You're saying all these things, but where's the emotion? Where is the conviction coming from you? All right? When you are standing there giving a speech, you are the representative for that topic, and that conviction and expressiveness needs to come out in how you talk. And these are all things that can help your credibility or ethos. Now, our next big category from Aristotle is called logos. Now, this is what Aristotle calls logical appeals, all right? So when you're using logic, that's logos, all right? Now, what this basically is it's good evidence paired with reasoning, all right? Good evidence paired with reasoning. That is effective logic. That is effective logos. Not just evidence, not just reasoning, the two of them combined, okay? So let's talk briefly about these two parts. So first, evidence. Not all evidence is created equal, okay? So you want to be sure you use the most effective or best evidence, not only for your subject, but that's going to resonate the most with your audience, okay? Think of it this way. You've got 3 quotes from 3 different newspapers, but you've only got time to quote one of them. Which one do you pick and why? Well, that's where this comes in, these tips for evidence. And the first one is you want to try to use specific evidence. And what I mean by that is you want to try to use evidence that is as specific to that target audience or your situation as you can find. For example, if I was to say, we need to increase the minimum wage here in Kentucky because the national average is only this, and that's below the poverty line. That's okay, but if I can say, we need to increase the minimum wage because within the state of Kentucky, the average is this, and that's below the poverty line, which one is going to be more acceptable? Which one's going to resonate more with people in Kentucky? Well, the one that cites Kentucky. Because the broader it is, the more that, and you've probably seen this, the more that allows people to go, well, that might be true in so-and-so, but it ain't true here. So the more specific your evidence is to what you're talking about in that target audience, the more effective it's going to be. You also, when possible, want to try to find novel evidence. Now, by novel, I don't mean in a novel or even evidence that is funny. What we mean here is evidence that comes from a source that you wouldn't think that would come from. For example, let's say you were going to give a speech about the legalization of marijuana. You were going to say we should legalize it, and you had a quote supporting your position from the former director of the DEA. You wouldn't think that individual would probably have that view. So because that's novel, you wouldn't expect that. The audience is going to go, oh, wow, that's going to resonate with them more. So when you can, try to find that novel evidence. You also want to use evidence from credible sources, or as credible as you can find. Look, and I'm not trying to upset nobody, but I think we can all agree that there are certain news outlets that tend to have a political bias, whether they tend to be more right-wing or tend to be more left-wing. You need to understand that. If you're giving, for example, a speech about why gun control is wrong to a hostile audience, and every source you cite is from the National Rifle Association, they're not going to find that credible because they know that organization has a political slant. Same thing as if you were giving a speech about why we need to do something about climate change to a hostile audience and every source you cited was from Greenpeace, it's going to feel the same way. So try to find good, credible evidence from good, non-biased sources. But it's not enough to just have good evidence. You have got to explain the point of it. Okay? You can't just say, methamphetamine addiction is up 26% in the state of Kentucky. You can't just say, now that's just a made up stat, okay? But it was like, you say methamphetamine addiction is up 27%. This means this many people more are getting addicted and it's costing us this much more, having to put this many more people in jail, which is causing all these other issues. You have to give the impact. You have to explain what your evidence actually demonstrates. And that is what we call reasoning. Okay, so evidence, if you want to think of it this way, evidence is like giving a stat, but reasoning is explaining what the stat means and what its impact is. Because reasoning is drawing conclusions based on the evidence you have. All right, it's not just enough to give people evidence. I often say, when it comes to public speaking, and I'm not trying to be offensive here, but people are lazy. I include myself in this. I mean, think about it. How many times have you ever gone to hear a lecture or speech that you knew was on something you needed to know, but the speaker wasn't that good, so you just zoned out after 5 minutes and played on your phone? Yeah, I've done it too. We all have. So you've got to pay attention, okay? It's not just enough to give the evidence because people are lazy. You cannot guarantee the audience will make the connection. You have to give it to them, all right? Because reasoning without evidence is just your opinion. There's nothing to back it up to basically solidify the idea that your logic and reasoning here is good. It's just your opinion without solid evidence. And evidence without reasoning lacks impacts. Okay, reasoning is what gives its evidence impact. So it's important here that you understand evidence and reasoning go together. Now, there is a companion video to this one that deals with types of reasoning and logical fallacies. I'm going to highly suggest you watch those after this one because we'll delve more into the different types of reasoning and mistakes people make in those two. So make sure you check those out as well. Now, that leads us to pathos. And what is this? Well, this is Aristotle's name for emotional appeals, all right? Pulling on people's heartstrings, okay? They somehow try to evoke some type of emotional state within you, hoping that that will be persuasive on some level. And you see this all the time. And a great example of this is advertising. Like television advertising. These are these boxes where you watch stuff on. I know most of us now watch things on tablets, phones, and computers, but they still have ads. You had these ads, and a lot of them are only 15, 30 seconds. So they rely on an emotional punch to get you invested. So you see some examples down here. Now, one that's not mentioned, a huge one, is fear appeals. Basically, an ad that tries to scare the snot out of you. Great example of this is home security ads. The basic message of these ads is that if you don't get this home security system, your family's going to get murdered. That's how those work. So they're trying to make you feel scared so that you get their home security system. Same with some of these other ones down here. Ads that try to make you feel sad. You ever seen those ASPCA cruelty to animal ads that have all those pictures and you thought, oh, those poor animals, they're appealing to sadness, anger. Political ads try to do this a lot, get you angry. Happiness. Ads for like food places like Burger King, Taco Bell, Olive Garden, whatever. In this area where Gateway is located in North Kentucky, we have a lot of ads for Kings Island Amusement Park. They never show you standing in the 3-hour-long line in 98-degree summer heat. It's always people happy and fun and riding and stuff because they're trying to make you feel excited, all right? And that should be pride, not price, but pride. Great example, military ads. Recruitment ads for the military, few and the proud, the army of one, let the journey begin, these whole things. So they can be incredibly effective when used correctly. So we need to talk about how you actually appeal to people's emotions and do it effectively. Well, first, you want to use emotional language. Don't just say, it was hard. You want to say, like, it was so hard. I thought my fingers were going to fall off. I was so tired. I thought that there was not going to see another day because I was so tired. Use that kind of emotive language to put people in that state of mind. And this is using vivid examples. It's one thing to say there was a car wreck, or say there was a car wreck that had this, that, and you explain more. So you need those things. And again, you need to speak sincerely and with conviction. That's incredibly important when trying to create emotional appeals. Now, some guidelines that are about emotional appeals, because you can overdo it on emotional appeals. You can hit that emotion button so hard that it actually has the opposite effect. It turns people off. If it makes people feel too uncomfortable, they won't want to watch it. They won't want to listen to it. So make sure they're appropriate to the topic. Don't overdo it. Stay within some guidelines. Don't deliberately set out to make the old man and woman in the front row cry. No. So make sure you don't overdo it. And remember, emotional appeals are not a substitute for good evidence and reasoning. Right? It may seem initially like it is, but it's not. A way I tend to put it is like this. Emotional appeals may get people off the couch, but good evidence and reasoning is what will keep them off the couch. You ever heard a speaker or thought about something or read something, got you motivated to go do something, and you were like, yeah, I'm going to go do, whether it was learn a new hobby, start an exercise plan, learn how to cook different, whatever. And you're all motivated and gung-ho about it. And then after a day, you're like, never mind. That was an emotional persuasive appeal. It got you all excited, but then that fades. That's why you need to pair that with evidence and reasoning, because that will actually create a lasting effect. And that is the basics of ethos, pathos, and logos. So ethos and pathos and logos, again, come from our good friend Aristotle, and they're great basic tools to understand because, again, Aristotle lived back in the BC times. Yet that truth that he laid down about the importance and effectiveness of ethos, pathos, and logos continues to be shown to be true to this day, which should also give you a lot of confidence in trying to use those techniques to help you be a good persuasive speaker.